Happy Thanksgiving, patrons, and welcome to a new episode of the Awesome Friday podcast. If you're in America, that might be confusing, but it is Canadian Thanksgiving, and we are here talking about the Vancouver International Film Festival as it wraps up for its 2023 edition. I am your host, as usual, Matthew, and with me, as usual, is Simon. Say good morning, Simon.
One day I need to introduce you, just for a nice change. Hello.
Only if you use your flat Canadian accent, your Pacific Northwest Canadian accent.
Do you really want? You don't want to hear that?
No. I mean, I really do, but
I'll do. I had to be a New York Jew in the 1940s in a play once, so I'll wheel that accent out of the closet and just wow everyone with that one.
Yeah.
I had a speech coach. We have a yearly thing of Theatre Under the Stars here, which is a big outdoor musical theatre thing, which I'm sure you've seen. And the musical theatre head woman, the head honcho, is this wonderful woman called Wendy, and she was my voice coach for this play when I had to do this accent. And so I did some prep work by looking at as many different Jewish American accents as possible and trying to emulate them. And I walked in and demonstrated it to her, and she just said, "No, no."
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's actually a fairly common occurrence. That someone says, "I can do that accent," and the voice coach goes, "Oh, for Christ's sake, why do you always?"
Yeah. Turns out there are multiple different Jewish American accents, and I was doing completely the wrong one. And anyway, it worked out well at the end. It worked out so well, actually. A Jewish American came to watch the play at the Metro, if you know, of course you know what the Metro Theatre is. So there's a little bar upstairs afterwards where you can go and have a little drink after the show. It's just down, so everyone sort of hangs out. And I walked in and the woman was like, "Oh, I think really good job." And I went, "Oh, thank you very much." And the shock on her face, to hear. And she was Jewish American, and she thought I was Jewish American.
Well, that's the biggest compliment you can get, right?
Absolutely, the highest accolade. And let me tell you, if she heard me do that accent literally a day after that show wrapped, she wouldn't have that same opinion. And it's pretty much gone completely now. But that was nice. That was really, really nice. But
well, yes, they say practice makes permanent, right?
It's it's a muscle for sure. Yeah. Like all acting. So in Thanksgiving news, I haven't told you this, but yesterday my wife and the kids went on a hike around there's a lake up the top of Seymour Mountain.
Yep.
Which was advertised as a 1.5 hour walk, and it's basically a 4-hour vertical climb up the mountain to this lake. Anyway, this may be an English.
That's only true because you are English and have children.
Right. And so the kids were fine. I think my wife was a little surprised, but I think it's relative to other crazy hikers in this town, it was probably quite easy. But I wasn't feeling good, so I hung back and did some other things. And then at 4:30, I decided, I think I'm going to make a Thanksgiving dinner. So I went and bought a turkey. I've never bought and cooked a turkey before. And I brought it home at 5 and then looked up the cooking time for a roast turkey, which is about 3.5 hours. And they were coming home for 6:37. So I broke that bird down. Broke it down. I called on everything I've seen in Tournament of Champions and beat Bobby Flay, and I took off the 2 breasts and the legs, and I seared them in butter, and then put a bed of onions down and slow roasted that fucker in salt and pepper for an hour and a half. It was amazing, and then made fake beer gravy. Turns out, instinctually, I made a great turkey dinner. So that was our Thanksgiving last night.
I mean, that sounds tasty. And I'm jealous, except for that I'm at my mother-in-law's house, and we're going to have a huge fucking turkey for dinner tonight.
Yeah.
So,
nice.
Thanksgiving is wonderful. So before we move on to the movies we're going to cover, because we're on a bit of a time crunch today, but let's just say, what are you thankful for in the year of our Swift 2023?
It's a cliche now, but healthy families. That's it now. I don't really care about anything else anymore. The whole world's going to shit. It's so hot here at the moment. I've had to change back into shorts and get the aircon back out in October. and which is ridiculous. So the whole world is we are past the point of no return. So what am I am thankful for small things, which is the health and happiness of my family and my wife and my kids. That's it.
Yeah,
That's all I really care about.
I watched the local news with my father-in-law last night, and there was like during the weather report there was this weird undercurrent. I hadn't watched like an actual news report, an actual weather report on the news anyway, in ages, like an actual full episode of the news. And during the weather report, there was this undercurrent of like, this isn't normal. Like this isn't normal. Like none of this is normal. And like I don't know what to do. Like this weird undercurrent of everyone just being like, what have we done? What have we done?
Yeah.
It's depressing. But I mean, for the same reasons, I'm basically thankful for the same things. Healthy family, big family, everyone in touch, everyone likes each other. Which I don't. This sounds like a normal thing, but in my family, not so much.
No.
And I'm thankful that we still get to do this stupid show every week, and that we have any number of people who listen to us ramble on about film, as
Which
though we had any expertise whatsoever.
we're very grateful
Um,
for it, though.
yeah. Anything you're thankful for movie wise
Thankful movie wise.
or entertainment? I mean, just like break it down.
I'm thankful for a few moments of Ahsoka where I'm like, oh, this could be where Star Wars could go now, and then it kind of went into traditional Star Wars in the end. But there's like many of our friends, like we've talked about before, I think I'm feeling kind of done with Star Wars just circling itself like a vulture over and over and over. I don't have any faith in any of the new films going anywhere new or doing anything interesting. I just don't. So every
So
time I
you're
see a
how is that you're being thankful for anything?
so circling, yeah, there were some moments in Ahsoka where some very exciting episodes, really in the middle of that pack or the first maybe half, where I thought they're actually doing something a little bit different here outside of Jedi's and lightsabers, and I really liked Ray Livingstone's portrayal of a baddie who wasn't like trying to chew the scenery. He was a complex character who'd lost faith. I'm really interested in characters who have lost faith in something and it defines them. And it's the same with Rogue One as well. And the idea of a Jedi losing faith because the Jedi, it turns out, as you get older, you realize the Jedi it's just terrible. The whole thing is terrible, and Anakin stops from Darth Vader stops being this like villain to someone you can actually empathize with, which it's debatable as to whether that was actually needed in the first place, but I really enjoyed the duo of Ray Livingstone and I'm sorry I don't have her name pulled up, but the his sort of Padawan. I really like the stylings, the high fantasy elements of Ahsoka. I thought were fantastic. Like almost felt kind of 80s Masters of the Universe crawl kind of. I like fantasy in my sci-fi, obviously, because I like Star Wars. So the design decisions to bring out some stuff from the prequel trilogy, which I think has amazing visual design and production design, and to introduce that with like some more suits of armor, like traditional suits of armor for those two mercenaries. Some really interesting things going on there. I'm starting to find the lightsabery stuff the least interesting. So anything beyond that, like Ezra using the Force as some kind of wuxia martial arts, it was fantastic. And so any nugget of that, I'm thankful for because it makes me feel like I might like Star Wars again or love it again. What are you thankful for in media?
Honestly, there's been so many great films that I could talk about, but I'm just going to circle back to we are living in a golden age of Star Trek, which is my favorite thing. So we have, in very much the opposite way of Star Wars, we have an ongoing franchise that has ongoing multiple entries in it, all of which are trying new and interesting things and pushing the franchise in new and interesting directions. And the franchise just doesn't seem to be afraid to do that because we have Strange New Worlds, which is basically just the Star Trek classic formula. We have Picard, which is cashing in on nostalgia, but also like giving. Uh, it's interesting to say it's giving closure to characters who had a pretty good final episode in their original run, but giving closure to fans, I think, giving something back to fans. And then you have Lower Decks, which is very it's very makes fun of Star Trek in the way where they people who make it clearly love Star Trek. I don't know if you've watched the most recent episode, which is called Parth Ferengi's Heart Place, but they go to the
Brilliant.
home planet of the Ferengi and they bring back some characters from Deep Space Nine, and just everything about it is like so. You know when you make fun of a friend and it's from a place of love, and you know that like it's because you love that
Yeah.
friend. That's what Lower Decks is, and I love
Yeah.
every second of it. And then you have
And that.
Discovery, which is trying to be, and I think I like it more than a lot of people do, but even though it can be quite uneven, but like it's trying to be a more modern, serialized television show
Mm,
with big sci-fi. The last season was great with big sci-fi ideas, and the decision to cast them into the far future instead of leaving them in the past, like leaving them as a prequel, making them a sequel. I think was super interesting, and dropping
mm,
them into a universe where the Federation had been completely sundered was super interesting. And I just think that like Star Wars is never going to really do. It's weird to say that Star Wars isn't going to like break up the main organization of the universe because they have done that, but I don't think they did
mm,
it in such in a very successful way.
mm,
Um, so yeah, I mean, again, we live in a golden age of Star Trek. How am I going to complain
mm.
about that? Like, we have 5 TV shows right now. It's ridiculous, and like Prodigy isn't on was obviously dropped from Paramount Plus, but they made a second season. It will come out eventually. So I just hope to keep enjoying Star Trek for what it is. It's amazing, and I love it.
Yeah, it seems to have found that really good point of cover versions of itself made by people who understand what it kind of what the heart of it is and how it can be reflected in so many different ways. And when you think about Discovery versus Strange New Worlds versus Lower Decks, even like Picard in there as well, you've got multiple genres here,
Hmm.
and yet it all feels like the same thing because you really get the feeling, especially with Lower Decks, I have to say, even though I don't understand 99% of the references, you really get the feeling that it's made by people that grew up on it and really have a deep love and appreciation for it. And it also sidesteps that thing where it's been reverential but without detriment to the story. I think there's one episode of Lower Decks that I felt like I just didn't get because I hadn't watched Voyager, and the most recent it might have been the first episode of the new season or the second, was when they go to a ship dock and they find the Voyager in a museum dock or something, and it's still
Yeah,
there. And they go every little panel has, and I'm sure people like you who know Voyager backwards, like, oh, it's that thing in the goop, and like, oh, I love that, and I didn't get like 95% of it. I didn't get at all, and I think that's the for me that balance was off, but the rest is great.
yeah. I mean, it's definitely reverential. I think the big strength is that unlike Star Wars, they Star Trek has always been more than one thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
you watch original Star Trek and you have like submarine combat episodes and also westerns and
Mm-hmm.
also mano a mano fights with a monster and
Mm-hmm.
also philosophical discussions and also comedy episodes with small rodents that coo and eat all the grain. Like it's never been just one thing. So
Yeah,
it allows it to be more than one thing today. And I think that
yeah.
also unlike current Star Wars, which seems to be like original Star Wars was a very much a conglomeration of George Lucas's influences.
Mm.
And current Star Wars is that too, except for that everyone who's making its influences are Star Wars. And while that's also true of Star Trek, I feel like they seem aware enough to bring new stories into the universe and do them in a Star Trek way, as opposed to just
Mm.
doing the same shit over and over and over and over again.
Mm.
And Lower Decks is probably the most fan servicey of them all because it makes fun of stuff all the time, but
Mm.
it also like just routinely points out the absurdities of things they've done in Star Trek before. So
Mm. Yeah.
I love it. I love it a lot.
It's apparent. How many Trek tattoos do you have now?
Just the one. Just the
So,
one.
are you wearing a Trek tee? It looks like your
Oh yeah,
shirt.
I'm wearing an original series tee for the menagerie right now.
Torn between two cups.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
I would love for you to just watch original series so we could talk about it, but it's a big
I've
ask.
seen I've seen a lot of original series, but I watched a lot when I was growing up, and it was on British TV. So I have no idea of order or of anything I've seen. I'm not sure it really matters, but
It does not. It really doesn't with the original series. That doesn't order doesn't matter until modern TV when we started actually serializing things.
I watched enough of the OG series to turn my nose up at Next Generation. Like, oh, these aren't the same. He's not
Oh,
Kirk. He's not Spock.
we all did that at first,
Yeah,
and now
yeah.
it's everyone's most beloved show.
Is it okay? Is that like the Trek favorite? Do you think?
I mean, it is because right now because the people like when Next Generation was on TV, the people who are the main crowd of people who are gonna start watching it grew up on original series, and the people who are watching new Star Trek now are people who grew up on '90s Trek.
Mm-hmm.
So that's in the same way that the prequels are among the most popular Star Wars movies right now because all the people who were kids when they were new are
Mm-hmm.
adults now. Um, yeah, it's just that generational turnover thing.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, there's lots to be thankful for, and we're thankful for all of it. But we have a bit of a time crunch, so we should probably move on. We are talking about the Vancouver International Film Festival, which is having its 43rd year this year, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how many of these have you attended, Simon? This is my.
Ooh, like
Uh,
virtually or in person?
yes, however you want to count it. I don't know.
God, this is probably my fifth. I want to say
2, 3, 4.
it's fewer, probably fewer than you. I'd say.
Probably.
How many is yours? Let's take it from there.
I'm just trying to count. This is my eighth. Pretty sure this is my eighth.
Right, so this is probably about my fifth.
Yeah, because I missed a couple. So 2014, 15, 17, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. Yes, 8.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's been a good festival this year. Lots of big titles, lots of
Yeah, it's felt better. Yeah.
new things. A little more of the stuff that TIFF would have got. It's Vancouver's an interesting festival because it comes so late in the festival season that oftentimes the stuff that gets sold or
Mm-hmm.
distribution deals at Toronto, your Torontos of the world,
Mm-hmm.
already have them by the time they get here. So
Yeah.
there's a lot less. Typically, there's a lot fewer like world premieres. There's often like a lot of Canadian premieres, but not very few movies debut here.
Mm-hmm.
But that still means we get lots of good films, and we're going to talk about 3 of them today. But if you want to read more, like if you go to my homepage, which is stretch.ca, you'll find a couple of links to a couple of reviews in a couple of different places. And before we launch into that, it's as good a time as any to remind everyone that all of the movies we're about to talk about would not be possible without the love and care of all of the performers involved therein. And those performers are still on strike as of today, as of this recording. And we should stand in solidarity with them, as we should with all workers. And I know they're back at the table, or they have been back at the table this week. I've been away, so I'm not 100% up on it, but we hope they get everything they want, as the writers seem to have, um, because they deserve it. And on a similar note, the Canadian union, which is called ACTRA, they are in dispute with the advertising agencies of Canada, and I hope they get whatever they want to.
Fingers crossed. Yeah,
Fingers
would be
crossed,
nice.
yeah.
Yeah.
If you want to support the show, we do, of course, have a Patreon and a Ko-fi. You can find links to those in the show notes. And for as little as $2 a month Canadian, you can support the show and get bonus episodes. Although apologies to patrons because we're on vacation this week. There will not be a bonus episode, but we'll try and cook something up for you next week.
Mhm.
Um, and with all of that out of the way, let's start talking about some movies. So let's start with we're going to talk about three movies probably today, and we're going to start with one which is actually an ESPN 30 for 30 produced sports documentary, which we both I think wanted to talk about because it's something that we both lived through, which is
Mm.
I'm Just Here for the Riot, which is directed by Kathleen Jame and Asia Youngman. Kat Jame also produced two other documentaries, which I've seen and liked, called Searching for Big Country and The Grisly Truth. So she has a real theme of Vancouver based sports documentaries. But this one is about the 2011 Stanley Cup Riot that happened in Vancouver, which we were both present for.
Mhm.
Um, and it's a pretty standard talking heads documentary. Um, Lots of people speaking about the tone of the city and about how the riot went down and where it went down. And I don't know if you're familiar. For those of you who maybe aren't familiar, in 2011, the Vancouver Canucks made it to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup versus Boston, playing at home. And very famously and very embarrassingly for the city, uh, the Canucks lost. And that's not the embarrassing part. The embarrassing part is that um, there was a huge fucking riot. And because we lost, and something like 120 cars were damaged, well over 100 people, I think closer to 150 people were injured. Over 100 people were arrested on the day, and something like 300 or 400 people were arrested or charged with something in the days and weeks and months following. Um, it was a huge black mark on Vancouver's reputation as a city, to say the
Mhm.
very, very least. And this documentary, I think, had the potential to be something really interesting and special. And I think that it does a really good job of talking about how exactly the riot went down, um, and where, and that it was embarrassing. And I think it really fails in two very specific ways, personally. One is that it does not do a very good job interrogating the why of it all. Like, why did we have this riot? It does not make sense. There's lip service paid to the idea, the feeling that I distinctly remember personally. I don't know how you feel about this, Simon, but like, I distinctly remember there being on the day of the last game, like, either we win or we riot. Like, it was gonna, like, people wanted to riot. There was a distinct tone shift in the city, and I feel like the film does not get into that like at all. Um, Even though it does get into like social media, the social media effect, which is still relatively new at the time, and also into like the idea of mob mentalities. But then it also has a number of talking heads, many of whom were sports commentators, many of whom were people who were on the ground and like trying to stop the riot. And then it also talks to a bunch of people who were rioters, and it tries to make me have sympathy for those people. And my two-word review of that is fuck that.
Yes.
So I think it's a very well produced technically documentary, and I think it fails, and it feels like a big missed opportunity, and
Mhm.
it's very disappointing as a result. I don't know. How do you feel about it?
Uh, I mean, you said everything. That I agree with everything you said. I think what I didn't know is that there was an identical riot in
Four
'94,
94.
game 7 against Boston for the is 7 the last one? Is that when you win the cup after game 7, or is
Yeah,
that like
The Stanley Cup is a best of seven series,
right?
so Game
Okay,
Seven is the last game no matter
right, right.
what.
So and watching the footage of it happening, it was like it could have been the same riot and for the same reasons. And so there are definitely some interesting parts of the documentary. It initially starts going into what causes people to rage and how I'm really interested in the group psychology of mob mentality. I'm really interested in that. Um, in it and in literature as well, books like Lord of the Flies deals with that really well. And I was really interested when they started diving into that, and then they kind of stopped because it seemed like the rest of the documentary's focus was on speaking to the writers, and so fair dues, they got these people on camera, some of them blurred, some of them not, to talk about their experiences. But as you said, like for whatever reason, they decided their unique selling angle would be to allow these rioters to play the victim card. So there was a lot of people picking us up because we were rioting, or people were being nasty to us on the internet, which makes them as bad as the rioters, and and I'm just like, are you fucking kidding me? Because I remember that night really, really well. I was living on the edge of Chinatown, so I could see and hear it out my window. It was just over the viaduct, if you know Vancouver, and just I just remember getting angrier and angrier at the absolute senseless idiocy of what was happening in my city, and also um, there was at one point, because I was on Twitter a lot at that point, and at one point there they moved towards the library, and there was a bunch of people going, "Fuck it, we got to go in." Like, they are wrecking downtown. We can't let them wreck the library, and I was really close to going out, and then it all sort of fizzled out before they got to the library. And for this documentary to have such a strong focus on, but what about them? They are victims of our culture too. I thought was really misguided. Like, I don't care that they have repercussions from being documented rioters, that they didn't think about all the photos that were being taken, even for a second. And also, mob mentality is one thing, but I've been part of a crowd that's turned nasty, and I've never once decided, oh, I think I'll smash some windows and
Yeah.
top this car over. Like, I don't buy it, I don't accept it, and I don't. There's no part of their victim story that I really care about. That, oh, people were nasty to you on social media. Who gives a shit? It's because you
destroyed the
tipped it.
goddamn
You
city.
just
Like,
you tipped a bunch of people's cars over and took pictures in front of it. I don't fucking care that you were dumped by your sports teams because you were wearing their shirt when you took a photo in front of a burning cop car. Like, boo fucking who? Like, fuck around and find out. And if you can't deal with the finding out part of that process, then we've all learned something today. But I another thing I think it missed out on was that really interesting moment of social media. First, like, the difference between 94 and now is the social media aspect, and that pictures were everywhere, and groups of angry people, like I was angry, were naming and shaming, as they should have, for who these people are. Like, there's got to be repercussions for things like that. So there's so much in Vancouver that it goes unpunished, like antisocial behavior in Vancouver that goes completely unaddressed. And I think people are quite frustrated at that. I totally agree with you. I would have loved more on the build up to the flip. Like, what was the kindling? We got a lot of the riot. In fact, within the first 10-15 minutes of the documentary, you've had your riot section, and the rest of the documentary is all
yeah.
about the after effects. And it was a huge missed opportunity and really misguided for me.
Yeah, and like maybe at the same time, like I'll fully admit I would have a hard time feeling sympathy because they like there's foot. It's not. I don't think it's in the movie if I remember correctly, but like I was working in a place downtown, in a store downtown at the time, and that store got looted, and people I know were like huddled in the safe room, like fearing for their safety as the store got destroyed. And anyone who's like, "Oh, poor me, I got outed as being a rioter," like, yeah, fuck you, go ahead, like.
Yeah,
And
good.
our entire justice system is predicated on the idea that people can change. So like, if you got caught, if you got arrested and charged with being a rioter and you served your time, that's great. But you still did it. Like, I think you can change as a person, but I don't think you get to be like, oh, poor me about it. Like, no, that's just not how the world works. Like, this is still a thing that happened to you. You can be a good person now. And I think another major failure of the documentary is that none of the people who they spoke to who were rioters, first off, just none of them would cop to being instigators, which I think is a pretty massive failing. But who's going to cop to that, right? So it's sort of a flawed premise. But then also, like, none of them, it didn't ask any of them, like, what have you done since? Like, you
Mm.
obviously made this huge mistake. You've been named, shamed, potentially arrested and done time or paid fines for it. What have you done since to be a better person? What have you learned from the experience? And literally all of them are just like, oh, poor me, I shouldn't have been outed. Like, it's just such a massive disappointment, such a massive failure. There is one really good moment during that section where there's a woman talking about how, like, she's like, I don't think it was fair, I was at the game and then I went outside and then I was in one photo and I was named and shamed and ostracized by my community. And it cuts to the photo and she's arm in arm with a dude wearing a balaclava and a shirt that says, I'm just here for the riot. And, like, I'm sorry, that's a pretty damning photo.
Mm.
Like, why would you do that? Like, what kind of, and there's just so many more questions that could be interrogated about this whole thing, and it doesn't do any of it. And I feel like in the with the intent of trying to be, like, objective about it, they lost the plot, and it's
Mm.
just very disappointing as a result,
I think it
and
was a great,
a huge missed opportunity.
yeah. Um, it was a great opportunity to maybe examine the connections between the position of we win or we riot and connect it to the violence that's inherent in North American ice hockey. Because as a foreigner, as an immigrant, watching my first hockey game and the fight is then refereed and cheered on, I'm still horrified that that is allowed. There's no other sport in the world where fighting between teams is treated in such a way. And it's not actually allowed when hockey goes international. It's
It's
not
because
allowed anymore.
it's not
This is
even
a
hockey outside of North America. Yeah,
it's just North American hockey, and very similarly, there's been lots of studies between. Like, I'm from England. I grew up in the '80s. Hooligan culture around football was a massive problem. We rioted all the time, and it completely linked to the racism and violence that was associated with the game, and that's been pretty systematically stamped out in many different parts of the culture, completely banned on many levels, and it has made a difference on the English culture of hooliganism. Unfortunately, in parts of Eastern Europe, it's really bad still. But I would have loved to seen, just like you said, like the whys of it is the acceptance of fighting in hockey. uh, Is could that be linked to the acceptance of fighting if we lose? Like, I would love to see those kind of questions raised, because they're questions I have too.
yeah. Well, I mean, for me, this is a 2-star documentary, unfortunately, and I really liked The Grizzly Truth, um, especially. But yeah, it's a 2-star for me. How about for you?
Yeah, it's 2 stars for me as well. Huge potential and some really interesting points, but then just completely lost it, I thought.
Yeah. Well, let's move on. We're going to talk about again at least two more movies, but let's talk about. So this is one that I really wanted to cover because, um, for me, it was a very emotional experience watching it, and for you, you've never heard of the subject of this documentary.
Yeah.
And this movie is called Mr. Dressup: The Magic of Make Believe. And so for our listeners who are outside of Canada,
Hmm.
um, I don't know what the UK comparison would be, but Mr. Dressup is effectively our Mr. Rogers. And in fact,
Hmm.
Mr. Dressup and Mr. Rogers were like friends and like longtime collaborators. And Mr. Dressup ran for 29 years, from 1967 to 1996. If you are of a certain age in Canada, that means that you grew up watching Mr. Dressup, like, full stop. So I grew up in Canada. I was born in 81. He was on the air till 96. It's a preschooler show, so I probably watched it all the way to I probably the late 80s, probably not into the early 90s, but I definitely watched it all through the 80s. And this is just the story of Ernie Coombs, who is children's entertainer Mr. Dressup, who had a lovely show on TV that was all about doing crafts and being kind. And I don't want to spoil any of it for you because I think it's a really good documentary, but also I was weeping by the end of it.
Mm.
Because at the end of his life, he was a happy person the whole life. He didn't have any major, like, tragedy. His wife passed away in the 90s, and he had a fairly good like resolution to his life in the end of the 90s, early 2000s. But
Mm.
um, just going through like revisiting any amount of Mr. Dressup and the things he went through in the 90s, where it was just so emotional for me, just having it all
Yeah.
come back. I can't imagine what this movie would be like not having that context, which is why I wanted to talk about it. Because
Yeah.
what was this? Because I mean, without that context, my impression is that this is basically like Very Nice Man, the documentary, right? Like,
I mean, it very much was, but that didn't really lessen the effect of it. On your first point, the problem is we have many English parallels, and they keep getting arrested because it turns out they're pedophiles, and it just happens over and over and over with your Jimmy Saviles and your Rolf. Rolf Harris, I know he's Australian, but he was very similar position to Mr. Dressup for us in the UK in terms of creative, like teaching through creativity and arts and crafts and calm and being nice and that when the truth came out about Rolf Harris, that hurt, and Jimmy Savile was an institution of kid kindness, and it turns out terrible human being. So what was really nice, like spoiler, turns out Ernie
Ernie Coombs.
Coombs. Turned out Ernie Coombs had no skeletons in his closet whatsoever, and I was so thankful for that because I didn't. Every time there's one of these documentaries about our guys, you get to 3/4 of the way in and the music changes, and you're like, "Oh, here we go." Turns out he had 3 terabytes of child porn, and it was very satisfying for it to become apparent that this is just who he was, and he was. There was no darkness to him at all. So it was very, very interesting coming at this, never having heard of him at all before. I, of course, knew Mr. Rogers, but I had no idea who this person was. And what got me actually was not as nostalgic as I have none, obviously, for I did not grow up watching this guy. I could imagine I have empathy for you watching this because this whole thing is like, it's a kind of childhood that just doesn't exist anymore, even for the kids now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a kind of slow. I mean, part of the documentary was about the introduction of Sesame Street, the American influence on these slower kids shows, and how they stood their ground against it, which I thought was lovely. And I can imagine the feeling of watching this documentary and just it's like when you dream of being back in a snowy like Christmases when I were young were like a magical fairyland compared to the Christmases now because they are drenched in nostalgia, and I'm sure that's how it felt watching this as well. It makes you yearn for something that's just gone now, for us and for everyone else growing up. It's just gone. That kind of slow kindness doesn't exist, and I think that's one of the main things I took away was that as someone who's been in education for multiple decades now, you can draw a line between TV programming that states kindness and empathy as being the key human traits. Kindness, creativity, empathy, calm, listening. Like these shows stopped and the society changed. And
Mm-hmm.
you can see that connection. You can draw a line with modern cynicism of adults back to even things like South Park. South Park was I know this is a long time after this ended, but um, the whole culture of what TV teaches children changed after really 9/11. Like
Mm-hmm.
the fact that he died, I think the day before that, like I don't, I, it's a universal consequence and coincidence that I'm not willing to overlook. Like there's so much changed at that time, and I, as someone who believes that kindness is the most important thing you can have for people around you, it was lovely. It was really lovely. And what actually I got emotional at was obviously not the nostalgia, but it was the reactions of older people seeing him and seeing them turn into children again. and the messages from the parents phoning in and just saying thank you, just thank you, not just for what you do for my kids, but what you did for me. Like that
Mm-hmm.
gratitude of so many lives changed just from being kind and just from being creative to the two most important things that have always been for me. And the last 25 minutes of this documentary is hard. It's really, really hard because bad things happen to good people, and I've real trouble justifying when really bad things happen to people who've spent their whole life being kind and good to others. Like I want to believe in
Well,
karma. I want to believe in karma, and
yeah,
it makes.
the stuff that happens to him is nobody's fault, though. Like,
But that's
I
the
mean, not
thing, isn't
exactly,
it?
right? Like
The whole
he,
idea, the whole idea of karma is that you put good out, you get good back, and so for someone who spends his whole life putting good out, and for his whole life to fall apart in one night when his well, anyway, you'll see when you watch it.
yeah. I
I
mean,
found
it's
that
no,
emotional.
it's no secret that his wife passes away, and
Yeah.
very
Oh,
tragically
okay.
passes away.
I didn't know, but
Like
yeah.
it was national news at the time,
Right.
as
But
evidenced by the documentary. Like there's news reports of it in the
yes,
documentary, and
but I didn't know
like
though.
yeah, and just the fact that he carried on too. Like I got very
Yeah.
emotional. He does a performance with another famous
Oh
Canadian children's
God,
entertainer
Fred Perry.
called Fred Penner, where they sing a song together, and it's like days after his wife has passed
Oh
away, and
God,
that whole
yeah, it's
section
tough.
is. But the part that really got me, and not to be super spoilery about it, but like there's the last like 5 minutes of this documentary is basically just all of the talking heads turning to the camera and saying thank you, and I just wish
Yeah,
that I had had the opportunity to do the same
yeah.
because it's amazing how many people he impacted, and I'm getting teary just talking about it
I
because
know.
it's such an important part of the childhood, and I feel like Fred Rogers' legacy has somewhat continued. Like you have your Peg and Cat and Daniel Tiger and all this stuff that your kids have watched. That's all from Fred
Mm.
Rogers Media, and I feel like we don't have the same from the CBC with Mr. Dressup, and I feel like we should. And I think it's a shame that we don't.
So Peg plus Cat is Mr. Rogers. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's Fred Rogers Media.
Oh, cool.
Um, they do the big two. I think are Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood,
Yeah,
and Peg and Cat, but they also do like Odd Squad and a few other ones.
Peg plus Cat is fantastic television.
Yeah,
Really, really good. I don't know if you've ever like watched it, but
I have watched it with your children,
yeah.
so
Okay, it's
yeah,
brilliant. It's really brilliant.
yeah. But yeah, so I feel like the man has a legacy, but maybe not the entirety that he deserves. But yeah,
Mm,
the last 20 minutes of this movie, and the last five in particular,
mm.
if you are a Canadian of a certain age, I guarantee you it's going to make you cry.
Yeah,
So as a result, I'm giving this movie 4 stars.
yeah. It's a 4-star for me as well. Absolutely. It's even with the nostalgia element removed, it was lovely to see the effect he had on so many generations, on so many people, and but on a larger point as well. I love the story about the one of the bare naked ladies who I thought weren't speaking to each other, but they're all there. One of the bare naked ladies is like, yeah, I went for a beer with him and tried to throw my bottle caps away, and he put them in his pocket and went, like, keep those for crafting. And I just loved, I love, like, that echoes a lot with me, especially with kids now. With my kids, I'm always looking for things to small, cheap things, just to show them they can be anything they want. And it was, I just love how his show was about how to be creative and how to be kind, and it was just
Yeah,
lovely, really nice. I really, really enjoyed as well the difference between the scripted episodes, and then they just realized he wasn't good on the script, so they just let him go. They
yeah,
just let them improvise, and of course, as he kept thanking his team, the puppeteer, the various puppeteer women who were all brilliantly funny, and they were just sparking off each other, and you could hear the difference between the scripted and
hmm
non-scripted. It was lovely. It was really, really nice.
yeah. I loved all the sections that had to do with just adults still connecting with him. He'd go do a live show and the crowd would be full of adults just being coming to see Mr. Dressup. Or there was that section with Jonathan Torrens, who, for those of you who don't know, he's a Canadian personality and actor, but when he was in his early 20s, he had like a kid focused talk show called Jonovision, and he did an episode where he brought up like 80s childhood heroes. So there was like Sharon Lois and Bram and a bunch of other like Canadian entertainers. But when Mr. Dressup comes out, the crowd goes fucking nuts.
Yeah.
And that ended up being his highest rated episode of all time. Like the man had a real effect on Canadian culture, and I think the documentary does a very good job of highlighting that. That's what I'm trying to say.
There was a woman in this called Patty Sullivan, actually, that I used to watch when my kids were very, very young. And then she left, and I haven't seen her since. So it was really nice to see her still looking fantastic and just being healthy. And I think there's room to bring back Patty Sullivan's TV, because I think she had a very similar kind of vibe as well.
Yeah. I mean, we need more of that kind of stuff in the world.
Yeah.
Very generally speaking.
Yes, we do. Yeah. So yeah, 4 stars from me too. Very nice.
Excellent. Well, let's move on to another movie. We're running short on time, but this one's probably the bigger release. This one you can actually see. It's actually out as of today. As of this recording, it's been out in cinemas this whole weekend, from Elevation Pictures and Neon in the States. It is an Australian thriller called The Royal Hotel. And since I gave the lowdown on the first two, why don't you give us...
okay.
Yeah.
This is the only one I can really speak about. Royal Hotel is about two women, Hannah and Liv, played by Julia Gardner and Jessica Henwick, who are both fantastic in this movie. And it's good because they carry it. They're two Americans who are in Australia just having a good time, just traveling the world, and they realize in the middle of a boat party cruise that they're out of money, so they sign up with an agency to go and do some to go and work in a pub, and the only thing that's open is this mining area with a pub in it that's like 2 hours away from the nearest any kind of building whatsoever. It's right out in the sticks, in the bush, and they're told that like it could get a little mail out there, so be careful. And that's really the theme of the whole movie. It does get a little mail out there, just a little bit mail. And so basically, they turn up at this dilapidated like building in the middle of nowhere and have to put up with the clients. And basically, without really spoiling anything, they have to deal with this stomach churning, growing knot in the stomach of men being men, who miles from nowhere, miles from consequences, miles from judgment,
miles away from culture, having learned about feminism or Me Too, or any of that.
Even beyond that, just basic like politeness. And you what I really, really liked about this film is that it didn't go down the route that I was expecting, which was to turn it into almost like a slasher or a captive story, or have like a Scream style climax where the men weren't stereotypically characterized as murder killers. They were just like horny, obnoxious men. And that actually made it a million times worse. By the end of this film, like, I just felt like my stomach had been tight for the last hour and a half, and just getting tighter and tighter as these two girls get in more and more situational danger. Like, there's a lot of Ralph Wiggum in this. Oh, I'm in danger. Like, there's a lot, and you can see it. And what's really interesting is that the dynamic between Liv and Hannah is really interesting, and that Liv's more footloose and trusting, but Hannah can kind of see the breaking point of everything around her, and all the injuries that happen, all the bad things that happen that are terrible are almost not done on purpose by the men, but it's their fault, and so they try and excuse it all as well. It's just like a woman in Modern Society Simulator, and it was so much more effective because of it, because it didn't turn into a slasher movie or like a horror movie or a captive movie. It was just these two women around men who are getting more precocious and more drunk as the nights go past. I thought it's fucking fantastic. Like
Yeah, I mean,
it's really well shot as well.
I wrote a review of this movie already for real, and my opening paragraph is basically to break it down to one sentence is like it drops two women into the most dangerous place that two young women could end up: a remote town full of horny, entitled men.
Yes.
like, um, and I think you hit basically the nail on the head with all of your points here. That like, um, it's scary because it's just like that is what small towns full of men are like, especially like work towns. I don't know how much time you spent in a town like that, but when you go to a place that's just like the bar near a mine or a clear cut or any kind of like high paying or the oil rigs. I'm sure the bars near the oil rigs are like this. There are like this in Alberta too. That like you get a whole bunch of horny, frustrated dudes together, and just it goes south so quickly.
Mm,
I like that there's basically four main men in this movie, and each of them are a different type of terrible man.
mm.
Um, what's that clicking?
Oh, sorry,
Um,
that's me trying to reload something.
okay. Yeah, there's four men, each of whom are great, including apparently you didn't even recognize Hugo Weaving in this movie
Oh,
as the
that
drunk
man's
bar owner.
he's.
He's
I mean,
he's he's so good, and he's so Australian as well.
that won't be the first time. There's another movie. Oh god, years and years ago. I won't bother looking it up now, but I had the same reaction, like watching the entire movie and then learning it's Hugo Weaving. Like he is so good in this film and
Yeah,
completely unrecognizable for me.
yeah. And then the film also does a couple of really smart things, I think. Um, One of which is that it spends the first few minutes really trying to subvert what would be your normal expectations. Like, so not only is it not a slasher, but like when they get to the middle of nowhere, they're dropped literally by the side of the road, and then a broke down car picks them up. But it's not some like foreboding man. It's this like
Mm,
super practical, truth speaking woman who picks them up.
mm,
Um, and the hotel is not some kind of like ruin. It's dilapidated, it's run down, but it's not like a ruin. It's not like the kind of place you'd see and go, nope, you know,
mm,
like in so many horror movies. And there's a lot of moments like that where at the
mm,
beginning where it's sort of telling you that like this is kind of going to be kind of normal,
mm,
because then it is just totally normal that all these entitled men are terrible to them. Um, I think in particular, a lot of people are probably going to talk. There's a couple of men again in the movie, but I think a lot of people are going to talk about the character Dolly, who's played by an actor
mm,
called Daniel Henshaw, who is the psychopath one. He's the one who,
mm,
like, at the beginning, he's inappropriately intense, and 10 minutes
mm,
after the beginning, he's a psychopath. Um, but I think honestly, my favorite of the men in the movie was the character Teeth, who's played by a guy called
mm,
James Frechville, and
mm,
he's just the
mm,
kind of slow one who sits at the bar and thinks if he sits there and is sort of nice and helpful enough, eventually one of them will just Liv in particular will just sleep with him.
mm,
Um, and then when that doesn't happen, and he eventually explodes into violence, as they all do in
mm.
different ways, it becomes the most the way I don't want to spoil it, but the way that his outburst is framed is super interesting and super
Yeah,
effective.
yeah.
Um,
And very very modern as well. It felt really really real, and the way his character unravels is the kind of thing women have been saying a lot in the last couple of years of the nice guy issue,
yeah,
like the entitled person because I'm nice, and it turns out it's a cover for this entitled rage that it's just not
yeah,
happening, and it's very well done.
yeah. And then, and the other thing I was going to say, the other like expectation subversion is that like they get there and they're replacing two other women, and those other women aren't like they're drunk and like but they're not really. They seem to be enjoying their time. Like they're
Hmm.
not. They obviously are. They clearly have. There's a couple of moments where you're like, are they enjoying their time? But it's not like they don't appear to be in any immediate danger, and they appear to be enjoying being the center of attention. So
Mm.
it's a very interesting setup. And by the time the movie ends, you're right. Like Henwick and Gardner are spectacular. Henwick's character is clearly running from something, and it's never really told what she's running from, but it does make she's the one who makes
Mm.
most of the bad choices, and all of them are believable based on what we do know. And then Gardner threads this line of being basically the smart one. Smart's the wrong word, but basically like the aware one, because she's not running, and she has to like ping pong back and forth between forceful and vulnerable in such a way that like you realize now that like why she won 3 Emmys for Ozark, right? Because she's so good at that ping pong in this movie. It's something else to watch.
It's really well plotted in that the pacing wise, it builds to a crescendo slowly, and I think it's very very clever how it's written and how the scenes that kind of build on each other is a bit. It's a little bit of a frog in a hot pot kind of situation, as the each thing is slightly worse than the last, and the thing at the as you get towards the end, if that had been one of the first things that had happened, they would just leave immediately. But because it's a stairway of terrible things that have been incrementally slightly worse than each other, the whole film for an hour and a half takes you up this tightening until you realize that they are in actual real danger because of all the other things that have led up to it,
Yeah,
and because they're so isolated. And yet it doesn't turn it into a demonized men story. It makes it into a entitled horny men story. And
yeah.
there's it when I've closed the cast list now, but when Julia's character, when Hannah has this moment of just done, like near the end of the movie, and it's in total darkness, and something's just happened, and she is very very aware that things have now gone very very south,
Hmm.
and there's a moment where she expresses something that is my favorite moment in film so far this year. Just
Yeah,
the truth of it is incredible, and it's very very hard to get a reaction like that right without it sounding overdone or inauthentic, and it's brilliant. I mean, she's brilliant. I loved Jessica Henwick as well. Some interesting character work as well, because at the beginning she's shown to be a bit shy around men, and then when she's the main proponent for going out to this pub, and then she, through I think alcohol, becomes a lot more open with men, and I like also how we don't know that she's clearly running as fast as she can from something,
yeah.
but we don't know what it is. And I just think the whole film is just that well written, and it's a really good combo of brilliantly written, well paced, well directed, brilliantly acted, and just gut wrenchingly terrifying.
Hmm.
Really, at the end, really scary for them at the end.
Yeah. It's probably one of the better movies I've seen all
Yeah.
year, to be honest. Um, and it's been a pretty good year for film, so that's a pretty big piece of praise, I would say. Um,
How many stars are you going to give Royal Hotel?
it's a 4 for me. There's a outside chance it
Mm-hmm.
might go up if I watch it again when I watch it again, because my wife didn't get to see it. So, or did
Mm-hmm.
she? Anyway, we'll almost certainly watch it again.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because it is so good, and
Yeah.
I can't wait to see what Julia Garner does next, and also Kitty Green, who directed and co-wrote this. Can't wait to see what she does next. Um,
What have you done before?
Kitty Green did a film a couple years ago called The Assistant, which treads on some fairly similar ground about a woman played by Garner, who is a assistant to a high-powered executive who's very nakedly meant to be like a Harvey Weinstein. Um,
Oh, is that her? Right, I
yeah.
see.
Um,
Okay.
yeah. So like that's 4 stars all around. Well,
Yeah, me too.
so VIFF this year was good. We saw a lot of films, but these are 3 we wanted to talk about. But if you live in Vancouver, like definitely you should go to VIFF. It's great every year. And we have to wrap it up there because we're coming up against a time constraint. So thank you so much to everyone who is listening. Again, if you like the show and you want to support it, you can do so via Patreon or Ko-fi, and you can find those in the show notes. Normally, patrons do also get a bonus episode. Apologies again that there isn't one this week. If you'd like to find us, you can find us on the various socials, but there's too many of them. So you can find Simon at temporarypen.com and me at stretched.ca. And you can find all of our recent work and our social connections there at those places. And last but not least, we record in Vancouver on the unceded and ancestral territory of the Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish nations. And that is all of our show. Thank you so much for listening and for joining us on this Thanksgiving weekend on this awesome Friday.
Thanks, bye.